Welcome to the Indie Beacon Show, where readers can discover great new indie authors. Find us on all major podcast systems and YouTube. Join Charlotte Canion on today's show.
I'm your host, award-winning author, speaker, and actress Charlotte Canion. And tonight we're going to be interviewing Steve Friedman. He's a retired from the corporate world, but now he's following his passion, and that's writing. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Hi, Charlotte. Thanks for having me.
Steve, before we dig into your book, I'd like you to tell a little bit about your family and your background.
Sure. So I'll relate my background a little bit to kind of my story, which is in some of my books. So when I started writing, or really before I started writing, in the last 5 years or so, I recognized that there was a thread of introversion throughout my life, and it created great opportunities and also some great struggles. And over time, I realized there's kind of 5 phases of introversion, and that really followed through my life. I think it follows through most introverts' lives, but it's different timing. And the first one I would call unaware. So for many, probably for at least 2 decades, I was unaware of introversion. I probably had hardly even heard the word introversion. However, I knew as a kid and as a teenager that I was different. I felt that I wasn't necessarily normal in social environments. I didn't have the gift of gab. I didn't feel comfortable with that. It made me very nervous. Things under pressure really didn't satisfy me. I grew up with 3 older sisters, and they were all extroverts. So, especially in the summer and on the weekends, my mom would push us out of the house. She probably needed a break, and go out and play with your friends. And so my sisters were gone all day. After about a half hour, I was ready to come back home and do my own thing and do some reading and just relax. And then when my sisters came back at 5 o'clock for dinner, after dinner, they were on the phone talking to the same people that they had talked to all day. I just really couldn't understand it. And all I knew was that I was not comfortable in those sort of situations. Eventually, when I was in my 20s, I realized what kind of went into the second phase, which was uninformed. So I heard the term introversion. I knew what that was about, but I was not really informed about what that really meant. And so for me, I kind of affixed with a lot of the negative stereotypes and myths of introversion. So I felt like I was a loner. I was antisocial. I was a wallflower, a lot of negative terms which still exist today. And so it really was debilitating for somebody who, in my case, already lacked a lot of self-confidence. Only after many, many years did I really go into the third phase, which is really enlightenment. So for me, I read Susan Cain's book, Quiet, which is kind of the Bible of the 21st century for introverts. And it really enlightened me on, it's not really negative. This thing that I thought was a curse all my life is actually a blessing. There are a lot of strengths that everybody has, and including introverts, that are needed around the business table and around the social dinner table and things like that. And I realized it's not really that noose around my neck that I thought it was. And so that for me was in my mid 40s. It took a long time to get there. I've realized, talking with many other introverts over the last 5 years or so, that many people, they're in their 50s or 60s, are still looking for that point in their lives. And so it took a long time for me to get there. After that, I really dove in, as you said in the intro, it's become my passion and my purpose to not only learn about introversion for myself, but to help champion that and empower other introverts that are struggling with that, with the hope in the 4th and 5th phase, contentment and flourishing, that people can accelerate their own journey. People shouldn't have to wait until they're in their 40s, 50s, or 60s to have a true sense of authenticity and pride. It can happen much, much earlier, and it can change people's lives. And so for me, when I retired a few years ago, it gave me a great opportunity to match my experience in the corporate world with this true passion that I've had, and it's made a lot of difference in my life.
Well, it sounds like you're no longer that introvert that you thought you were. But you know what? You did make a point there when you said that, there were a lot of people, especially, let's say 30 years ago, even 20 years ago. But I find that those that are introvert usually, they're very smart because they're sitting back and absorbing things like a sponge. They're, they may not have a lot of friends, but I have some grandkids that are, I'm going to call them nerds for lack of anything else, but they're highly intelligent, so I'm actually giving you a compliment, kind of introverted.
Well, that's a lot of the twist that introverts are probably the first ones that need to actually realize that. And it's, and the rest of society kind of comes along at whatever pace they want to. But introverts have a lot of those strengths. They are, as you say, very introspective. So they think a lot about things, sometimes too much. Sometimes we ruminate about things and we worry about things coming ahead of ourselves. And I think that's where we need to try and learn how to refocus our attention on the present and on the positive. And, but introverts have that ability to observe and listen to things in the room. So whereas other people in a meeting room, for instance, might jump in and say what's on the top of their head and shoot from the hip, which can be an interesting form of brainstorming, but it's not always the most well-balanced approach to analyzing a situation. Introverts will oftentimes sit back, they'll listen, observe, consider a lot of the input. And then when they do share the input, it's usually a pretty unique perspective. And I think that's part of the challenge today, especially in the work world, is for leaders and people that are running meetings and decision makers to encourage everybody around the table, not just introverts and extroverts, but everybody, a diverse group of people around the table, to participate and bring their true selves to the table, because that ends up providing the most creative problem solving and the most interesting and unique decision making that drives business forward.
Yeah, getting all those different ideas. Well, your first book was called In Search of Courage. Now, do you dive into how to fix things in it, or are you just telling all the different components? What is in that In Search of Courage?
So the first book, In Search of Courage, I wrote a couple of years ago, and it's really my memoir. So it tracks my life as I looked back in recent years, but looked back into my childhood and my time in corporate America and challenges that really were oftentimes extremely difficult. And I found, unfortunately, very unhealthy ways to cope with that stress in my life. And only, as I mentioned, kind of in the middle of my career, did I realize that that was not helpful for me, and it didn't make me the best person, and it didn't make me the best leader either in my roles. And so I realized that either I can change and maybe go to a different company or a different job, or I can learn how to actually embrace my true self. And so I went through this journey of embracing myself, and that made all the difference in helping me to be a more thoughtful leader, a more prepared leader, and a more engaged leader, which many people wouldn't think that engagement is something that introverts excel in. But actually, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, we do excel oftentimes in more intimate relationships. So we probably won't walk out of a cocktail party with 100 business cards, but we'll probably walk out with a few relationships that we might develop into some pretty deep relationships where we really understand each other and we can work very closely together in a business relationship or in a social setting as well.
Yeah. So those people that you walk out with will be ones that you will cultivate. They won't be just, one night stands or people that you meet and you only want to, that I'm not sure I need to call this guy again. Well,
that's right. So that was really my first. I appreciate
all of this. Yeah, we're getting ready to go into a commercial, so hang on to that thought, and then we'll get into your next book, because I think that the corporate world will really embrace it. So we'll be right back after a message from our sponsors.
Mary Ann Fairmouth is a career consultant with 30 years experience in the national recruiting world, a multi-award-winning author in multi-genres, and a speaker that gives presentations to help you succeed. Her book, Revolutionary Recruiting, made the top 20 global list of recruiting books. Find her on Amazon your favorite bookstore, or at fairmont.com.
To embrace your children's imagination, check out Diane Floyd Bame's books for kids. There's The Moonling Adventures, all about the animals in the Serengeti. And then there's Harry the Camel, learning to love yourself just the way you are. Then The Little Girl in the Moon. There's one about friendship, another one about the big ideas, which is an inspirational story. And then Tour Tycho Town, right there in Tycho Crater on the moon. All of Diane Floyd Bame's books are available at B4R Store.
Hello, I am the author Denise Bryson. My first book is The Things That Cross My Mind, Inspirational Poetry with Life Lessons. And then my audio book is Love's Reality. And it is also inspirational poetry with a jazzy flair. And then my new book is The Sex, the Lies, and the Soul Ties. They're really short stories written from a poetic expression. And then I have my first children book series, the Blinky series, which the first book is called Meet the Coins, and it is both in English and Spanish. And then the new book, From Coins to Bills. I am the author, Denise Bryson.
Welcome to the Indie Beacon Show, where readers can discover great new indie authors. Find us on all major podcast systems and YouTube. Join Charlotte Canion on today's show.
Okay, we're having the privilege of speaking with Steve Friedman. Now, Steve was an introvert as a child, and he told us he had 4 sisters. That can be intimidating in itself. I wouldn't know because I was an only child for nearly 10 years, so I became like a second mother to my sibling. But Steve, you've written your memoirs, which is called In Search of Courage. Can you share with us the new book that you got out and a little about it?
Sure. So my new book, which comes out here in October, is called The Corporate Introvert, How to Lead and Thrive with Confidence. And it really takes that thread of introversion that we talked about earlier, the struggles, but also the triumphs. It combines that with 30 years that I had in corporate America, most in leadership positions. It takes a lot of stories from other introverts, day-to-day introverts, and some famous introverts and their perspectives and tips. And it brings a lot of models and strategies forward. When I decided to write the book, I wanted to make sure it was something that was impactful. So I hope that readers will read it through, because there's a lot of information that helps them to navigate corporate culture and tackle what have traditionally been obstacles like meetings, networking, change, communication, things like that. And also use it as a reference guide because issues come up. And so it really helps to guide people with really strong models on how do I tackle these sort of situations. The key being to tackle it your way, to be authentic about how you want to approach different things. And that way you can lead with your own strength.
And as we said, introverts have strengths. Now, what's this Beyond Introversion? Was that
So Beyond Introversion is my website. So I started the website a little bit over 2 years ago, right before I published my first book. And so I put out blogs every week on Beyond Introversion on a wide variety of topics. Some are business topics, some are health topics. We have a really interesting one a few weeks ago about the introvert brain and how natural dopamine in your brain can determine how you react and how you quench your brain, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. It's quite different. So we try and hit some that are more cerebral topics, and others that are, how do I deal with family gatherings at Thanksgiving, those sort of things. Have guest bloggers that come on Beyond Introversion as well. And we also have introduced a couple of quizzes that have been really popular. So introverts can go to the website. It's free to read anything on the website, and you can take quizzes. I've had over 1,500 people take our quizzes, and it gives a lot of insight, a report and a score afterwards on what are some of the strengths. So you may be aware of them, but some of them you may not be. And it also provides a lot of, I think, useful tips on how to use and grow your strengths, especially in challenging situations. So all that's available at Beyond Introversion.
that's exciting. Now, what do you see yourself going forward? Well, I mean, you've got your books. You've got. Do you do public speaking in corporate world?
So I'm rolling out the second book, the Corporate Introvert, as I mentioned, and so I'm in the midst of sharing that message with many other people this fall in coordination with the book. We're doing a podcast tour, so I'm sharing the message with about 15 different podcasts. So it's a way to connect with other introverts, leaders, and so forth in the corporate world, because I think that the message is important for introverts, whether you work or not, but it's also important for other people in the corporate world, whether you're an introvert or not, on how can we bring a diverse group of thought to the table. And so as part of that, I'm also speaking and talking to really two different groups. I'm talking to the corporate world in many different ways. So both as a one-on-one introvert mentoring circle, so that introverts have the opportunity to share challenging situations in a confidential setting. And we get to talk about how there might be some solutions that will help. Oftentimes introverts aren't comfortable to talk to their supervisor. So this is a way that they can develop those skills and then bring them back into the workforce. But also leaders, whether it's frontline, middle level, upper level managers, on how can you cultivate that more diverse and accepting culture within your organization. And then the second group that I'm talking with are at the college level, upperclassmen who are getting ready to graduate, and many are considering entry into the corporate world. And that transition from college to work world is always an interesting challenge for anybody, but especially for introverts who come into a brand new set of stereotypes and situations in the corporate world that they may not be prepared for. And the book really is helpful in addressing a lot of those situations, preparing introverts for how they can manage them and excel in them without going down kind of the more unhealthy path that I ended up choosing for much of my early career.
I'm going to ask you a question here, and I think I know what your answer will be, but you would expect a CEO or an upper line management that they should have the skills to know how to bring out the best in each of their employees, because each employee was hired for a different skill set. Do you think that is the norm? Or do you think, well, you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because I think there's a variety of answers to that. It wasn't that long ago in corporate America that largely the leadership approach was command and control. So it was, I am the leader, I am right, this is what you're going to do, and I'm going to tell you how to do it. And that has changed, but it's not completely absent. I'm sure many of the listeners can probably think of some managers that they've had that still hold on to that. And that kind of approach generally is not looking at what is the best way for me to have the people in my team contribute their best. So that leadership style is still a challenge. Thankfully, a lot of companies have changed their leadership style because they needed to, because employees demand more collaboration and participation, better work-life balance. They don't want to be told what to do and how to do it, and everybody has their own style. And many employees are leading with their feet. So if it's not the right environment, they leave. And the amount of loyalty back and forth between the company and the employee has changed dramatically over the last few decades. And so companies have realized we need to have a much better collaborative style if we want to keep them, as well as generally the diversity that we've been talking about, and diversity in a wider sense, people of color and gender and so forth, represents the larger public. And this is usually the set of customers that companies are trying to serve. So I think they're realizing that we can better serve a diverse customer by having diverse people around our business table working on marketing and strategies to engage and sell our products to those people. So it is changing, but it's not completely gone. And many people are probably still have to struggle with can I work best in that environment, not to mention how can I actually advocate for myself so that and for other introverts, so that leaders will come around to a more participative way of leading. And some will and some won't.
Do you think that COVID, with people working from home, might have been a plus for an introvert?
I think that
Because, yeah,
I think on the surface, many introverts have felt like, well, this is a good opportunity where I don't have to go in the office and I don't have to interact as much with people, and it makes it a lot easier. However, I think that many introverts have realized that in the end, it's been really frustrating. Maybe frustrating in different ways than extroverts who really thrive on the water cooler talk and interaction constantly throughout the day. But introverts, like most people at work, we're ambitious people. We have our goals. We want to achieve our objectives, our work objectives, our career objectives. It may push us oftentimes to stretch our comfort zone, but we do it because we're ambitious people. And to do that when we can't see people is really hard. So we still need and want that engagement. And like with everybody, it's harder to do during COVID. And so, yes, I'm sure, there's many people that are participating in Zoom calls all day, but we talked earlier about that deeper, more intimate relationship, and it's really hard to cultivate and maintain that through a phone line. Yeah. So I think that introverts have struggled probably in different ways than extroverts, but are generally probably looking forward to going back into the office, but also probably fretting a bit about that because it's kind of a tidal wave that'll come at us when we come back into the office for the first time, in some cases in over a year. And we have overwhelming social situations that we have to manage. But I think I think everybody's going to be happy when COVID is behind us.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take another short break here, and we'll be right back with Steve Friedman.
All right. Publishing marketing package for authors. $1,500 value, save 40% now. Includes a 6-piece marketing kit of 250 bookmarks, 250 business cards, 250 postcards, 1 table banner, 1 table runner, and 50 download cards, plus book cover design, ebook creation, PDF setups, upload to Ingram Spark, scroll placement, video commercial, and interview on IBS, plus much more. Email bourgeoismedia@look.com for details or bourgeoismedia.com.
Hi, I'm Mel Greenberg, author of Running with Our Eyes Closed, book 1 in the Empty Nested series. To the world, Samantha has the perfect life. 3 wonderful children, a loving husband, so she thought, and a life split between Dallas and Italy. When her youngest leaves for college, it all comes crashing down, forcing Samantha to re-examine everything. Over 7 days in one of the most romantic countries in the world, Samantha faces the past she thought she'd overcome and begins to redefine her role as a woman, a wife, and a mother.
What would you do if you had to put your life on hold to care for a loved one? Well, during COVID, almost all of us have been doing just that. I'm Charlotte Canion, award-winning author, actress, and speaker. And my book, You Have to Laugh to Keep from Crying, shows you how you can revive, thrive, and survive with 4 golden rules. You have to love one another. You have to respect one another. You have to have patience with one another. And most of all, you've got to forgive one another. I'm Charlotte Canion, and I approve this message.
Welcome to the Indie Beacon Show, where readers can discover great new indie authors. Find us on all major podcast systems and YouTube. Join Charlotte Canion on today's show.
Well, this is Charlotte, and we've had a wonderful time speaking with Steve Friedman. Now, he comes from the corporate world, so he kind of knows what all of y'all are experiencing. He's written a book called In Search of Courage, and now he's written Corporate Introversion. Steve, tell people how they can get a hold of you if they want you to come speak, at one of their events or maybe via Zoom. And give us your website. And you said you had a blog. You're welcome to share that blog with us.
Sure, thanks. So the best and easiest way to get in touch with me is on my website, beyondintroversion.com. So you can see my blog, quizzes. You can pick up a copy of the book. The book is also available through Amazon and through Books for Readers, B4R. And so I would encourage everybody to go check it out and pick up a book for an introvert in your life. I'm also available, as you mentioned, for speaking. So again, you can reach me best on my website.
On your website. Well, Steve, I always ask my interviewees to kind of give advice to, now, there's introverts out there, and you always wanted to write. I have the feeling that everyone has a book inside of them, but there's a very small percentage of us that get it out. So what kind of advice would you give someone, to get started on a book or on a project like that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think everybody has a book in them, and somebody told me that early on when I started writing, and I asked, well, what's the difference? So if everybody has a book in them, but everybody doesn't publish, and they told me, well, the big difference in their mind, which I truly believe is determination. And I really think that introverts can do very well in the writing and publishing arena because we tend to be very prepared and structured. And we tend to be very determined when we set our mind to it. We're very goal oriented, and I found that the writing process, and not just writing itself, but the publishing and the marketing aspects of it, are like a project, a long project. So there's a lot of different facets to getting the book out of your head and onto a piece of paper. But I found each one of them to be really enjoyable. And for introverts, I think it's a great opportunity, regardless of what you're writing, whether it's a memoir or a fiction book or something else, that it gives us a great opportunity to get a lot of those creative ideas out of our head and onto paper and share them with the rest of the world.
Well, Steve, thank you for your insight into introversion. You probably don't know me well enough, but I'm a type A, and I have been my whole life. I never meet a stranger. So introversion was not familiar to me, but my brother was. Mm-hmm. And like I said, he's like 10 years younger than me. So you've given me a little bit of insight into my brother's life. And I know that all of our listeners are intrigued, and they will just run out and get your book. And I want to thank you again, Steve, for being on the show. And this is Charlotte Canion, and I want you to remember that a rose is like a book. You can't know its beauty until you look at it. And a book is like a rose. You won't know its full beauty until it's open. Until next time, stay safe and have a nice day.
Thank you for watching or listening to the Indie Beacon Show, produced by Beyond Bourgeois for the Authors Marketing International LLC. Copyright 2021. Voiceover by Beyond Bourgeois. If you would like to be a sponsor of the show, please email us at authorsmarketing@outlook.com. If you would like to be on the show, please complete the form found on our website at indiebeacon.com. You may also watch previous year's shows on the website. Music is Frolic of Words, created for Indie Beacon